Mm-hmm. All right, now, I wonder if perhaps you're confusing the tail and the dog. I know you're not a conservative. You're somewhere on the left. I won't categorize you because I don't like to do that, and I don't really know. What I know is you're a really great reporter on what they say about Iran and why it ain't true for the most part, Gareth, but I know you're not a right-winger of any description whatsoever. You're somewhere on the left, and yet I don't hear you blaming oil companies or Lockheed Martin or any of these guys. They obviously have some role. We have pipelines going through Georgia. This isn't just about ethnicity.
Well, it's not about ethnicity, that's for sure. But I really think that it's not about pipelines either, in the sense that NATO expansion is so much broader as well as deeper in terms of the interests involved than pipelines. And indeed, if this were about pipelines, I dare say that the policy would have been much more careful. In other words, if it was about really keeping the pipelines secure and avoiding war, and if economic interest had really prevailed, then you would not have had the recklessness that is associated with this policy.
Palast said that what they did, they got away with the Baku-Tbilisi-Cayenne pipeline, however you pronounce that, but it was the second pipeline out of Turkmenistan or something was going too far for the Russians, something like that.
Well, I mean, the Russians certainly have an interest in promoting the alternative pipeline that does not go through Georgia. No question about that. And there is a kind of duel of, sort of competing pipelines, if you will. The United States would like the pipeline to go through an area that the Russians do not have a benefit from, and the Russians, of course, have the opposite interest. I'm not at all denying that. But what I am saying is that in the larger scheme of things, when you look at the kinds of policies that would be called for if your concern was to protect the pipeline itself, then you would not have been so adventurous as the Bush administration and its bureaucracies were in this case. Mm-hmm. And I make the same argument with regard to, the role of oil in regard to Iraq. And we've talked about this, I think, in the past, but I think it's worth mentioning that the oil companies, to the extent that they had an interest in this, which they did, it was to make a deal with Saddam, not to have a war with Saddam or to occupy Iraq and fight a war over the Saddam regime. And I think there are a number of other ways in which you find there are conflicting interests rather than coordinating or reinforcing interests between major corporate players in foreign policy and the military and its associated national security bureaucracies. And I would point to China as perhaps the most spectacular case of this, where in the Bush administration itself you have, the corporate interests very strongly supporting, treating China as a friendly business partner, whereas the neoconservatives and parts of the Pentagon certainly would like very much to view China and have China viewed as a potential enemy and one that we need to treat at arm's length and arm against and, publicly portray as a threat. So, I mean, these are two competing lines of policy, and you listen to William Kristol, for example. I mean, he is scathing in his rebuke to business interests for their refusal to get on board the view of China that the neoconservatives and their allies in the military have held so dear.
Mm-hmm. So really, you could even look at this as some sort of kind of major historical turning point happened in there somewhere where the entire establishment, which really, worked hard to promote the Cold War, at least, up through a certain point, that kind of thing, created this empire, sustained this empire, got on board for this empire. They created an establishment, the state itself, that is, in a sense, separate from them and more powerful from them and marginalizes them.
I don't know if I would say marginalizes them, but I think that, no question in my mind, that the national security state, if you will, does have autonomy from the major corporate economic interests in this country. And I think that it was an autonomy that was achieved during the Cold War, and which, of course, then persisted and even got stronger in the post-Cold War period. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that's happened is that as the national security bureaucracy becomes more adventurous and, has more wars of choice going on, and it has a greater and more negative impact on the economy, this has to be of concern to corporate leadership. But as I've stated previously, the corporate leadership in this country are essentially, have no cojones politically. They will not stand up. They will not speak out against policies that I think, for the most part, not all of them, but for the most part, I think they recognize that they are seriously injuring the economic interests of the entire United States, and that means the corporations as well. Not, of course, the arms manufacturers, but certainly other mainline corporate interests are harmed by these policies. But on the other hand, they are being bought off by various kinds of tax and other policies that are very handsomely rewarding them for their silence.
Yeah, it seems like with all the alienation and the destruction of the dollar, we're exporting our supply itself. They sold out Anheuser-Busch, but they can't export the old stuff. I know that I forget if this was Iraq. I think this was in Iraq, where everybody always drank Pepsi. They don't drink alcohol in their society, and everybody always drank Pepsi.
Right.
They'll never drink Pepsi again. America came and murdered a bunch of people, and that kind of thing counts. That's the billions of dollars, and it does seem like you have the military here and the national security establishment itself, all around, vaguely speaking, pushing their interests, and then you sort of have, I don't know, I guess it's not much of a battle, but you have the competing billionaires. One side that makes all their money off of sucking off the American taxpayer in the form of military contracts and so forth, and the rest are just the regular businessmen who, they're in bed with the government to whatever degree they have to be or want to be anyway. But these are the people who would rather just make money.
It's not really much of a battle, even though their interests are very much at odds. I think the important thing to understand is the degree to which the conflicts have been somehow kept so within very narrow bounds by the fact that the corporate interests of those corporations that are harmed by the war policies of this national security state, they are basically bought off by all these tax and other special favors that the government doles out to them.
And now, we got to talk about, address the national security state itself. It's a big, giant thing near where you live there in the D.C. area.
Well, you would point that out, wouldn't you?
Yeah, well, this is why you're such a good reporter, because you stay so close to them. I'm glad they haven't corrupted
close to
you.
The belly of the beast, yes.
Yeah, but no, this is a thing that most of it exists elsewhere in the world. They've divided the world up into these sections. And, it's funny, I was reflecting earlier, although I forgot my funny way I was going to bring it up, but there was going to be a joke there, something about Admiral Fallon and how here, you and I specifically even, we're looking at this guy and saying, thank God we have a reasonable guy in the military over there running CENTCOM who's keeping the reins on the insane civilians who are coming up with the policy in the vice president's office.
Right.
And yet this guy, frankly, is a satanic killer. And you look at, I don't know his religion, but in effect, the guy is pure evil. And you look at his interview in Vanity Fair where he talks about the Iranians are ants and we'll crush them if we feel like it. And this is the guy, he's the viceroy from, all the land from Morocco to Pakistan, right?
Well, that's right. He was a CENTCOM commander. He inherited and continued to work on a set of military interests that involved, holding on to and adding to military bases all the way across his empire, if you will, from Central Asia through the Middle East into South Asia.